Post-journalism, the press lost its monopoly on news when the internet democratized info. To save its business model, it pivoted from journalism into tribalism. The new role of the press is not to inform its readers, but to confirm what they already believe.
Yeah. So, I originally wasn't sure whether the media used to be less biased, but I stumbled across this really great YouTube video by a guy called Ryan Chapman, who actually analyzed whether the media used to be less biased, or whether it was just a sort of cherry picking, rose tinted glasses sort of thing. But it actually turns out that the media were less biased back in the day, and this was prior to the internet. This was when the media essentially had a lot of power and they had a lot of money, because nobody else could provide the news, and so they didn't have to be partisan as they are now. They actually could afford to just tell the news because the news was actually a valuable thing back then. But that changed with the internet. What happened with the internet was suddenly anybody could tell the news. And in fact, some people could tell the news faster than the big press organizations because there would be local people reporting on things going on in their vicinity. And this obviously took a lot of the wind out of the sails of the media. They no longer had this monopoly. And so they had to find a new way to a new business model, basically. And that really ended up becoming less about telling the news and more about confirming what people wanted to believe. And we see it with the New York Times. The New York Times, if you look at some of the New York Times articles prior to the internet, so in the early 1990s, 1980s, you see that it's actually a lot more factual. And there's even the opinion pieces tend to be a lot more factual in their sort of presentation. Whereas now, even not just the opinion columns, but also the actual news itself it's slanted towards a certain angle. And that's because since people can get news anywhere, they have to do something different. They have to do something new. And a lot of these people who are supposed journalists and commentators, one thing that they're very skilled at is, again, rhetoric. And so they use their rhetorical skills to essentially tell stories, very powerful and interesting stories.
Construct narratives with persona.
Yeah. And it's almost like a kind of TV serial. I mean, we saw this a lot during the Trump years, after 2016. We saw the ways that this changed the New York Times. The New York Times became like a kind of a TV serial in which Trump was like this kind of Saturday morning cartoon villain. And it was like, every article it may as well have just, at the end of the article, it may have well just said, tune in next week to see what, Donald Trump is going to do, So it was like an ongoing narrative about like Donald Trump and what is he going to do next, find out in the next issue of the New York Times. And so, it's why I don't really read the sort of press too much. I mean, I don't want to demean it too much because I do feel that the press is a little bit probably over demeaned. I think that pretty much everybody hates the press, and I think that they are of course they're biased. Every human being is biased, and yes, I think if you do read the New York Times for news, then God help you. But I think it's valuable anyway because it allows you to see what they're doing. It allows you to see what they're trying to convince people of. And that's why I do still read the New York Times. And look, I don't want to be completely unfair to the New York Times. It still does break important stories, and it does still matter. It's still an important voice. It's very easy to just dismiss it and just say, oh, they're all just biased, and they're just trying to, convince you of things that are not true. I don't think that's the case. I think there are some good journalists working at the New York Times. So I don't want to demean it too much, but I think, we need to be careful when we need to ask ourselves what they're trying to convince us of, I think.
The sort of narrative element and this constructing of personification of both events, of countries, of regimes, of ideologies, that kind of takes stories out of the realm of fact and into the realm of fiction. It means that people that are reading it don't need to They don't need to actually understand the first principles or the foundations of what's going on. It's an easy story between good and bad, between fair and unfair, between plight and justice. And there's this guy, Craig Jones, who I had on the show a couple of weeks ago, talking about he's created this new grappling tournament, which is going head to head with essentially the Olympics of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. And I mentioned to him, I was like, look, dude, the sport of BJJ is kind of confusing if you don't really know what's going on and you don't understand the intricacies of his foot position and what this side control means and all of this. But I tell you what I can get on board with: a huge amount of drama between two big organizations and athletes having to make the decision between prestige that's old and money that's new. Anybody can understand that. Anybody can. And I have this thing in my house talking to the guys by the pool yesterday. And I was like, much of the time I want to talk about ideas, and like your decision-making heuristic, a conversational heuristic that I try to catch myself on is if I start talking too much about people, their motivations, what they're like, I'm like, I'm creating this sort of personified narrative thing. And I'm like, look, dude, the Trump versus Biden is just, or Jordan Peterson versus some lefty person. It's just the Kardashians for people with 3-figure IQs. Like, that's all it is. It's just, it's reality TV for the Substack generation. And you're trying to, you're still doing the same thing. Maybe the ideas are a little bit more highfalutin. Maybe the people that are involved are a little bit smarter or intellectual or academic or something. But the fundamental foundation of this is gossip. You're gossiping about people. And that's, that idea of Craig, and also sort of what's going on here with this post-journalism idea, it brings news stories into a realm everybody can understand, which is the most fundamental human, which is who's hot, who's not, who's playing fair, who isn't, who's in, who's out. That's what it's focused on at the moment.
Yeah. I mean, I've actually noticed this in the ways in which the sort of stories, the sort of press stories are constructed. Like, they actually often use a lot of the same devices as actual literature. So a lot of these, these news stories, they will actually have fictional tropes. They'll have twists. They'll have poetic justice. They'll have irony, like dramatic irony, and all of this stuff. And so it shows that the writers are not telling you the facts, but they're presenting a narrative, which they're basically, probably what's happened is, it might be that they've just watched too many Netflix shows and that they're unconsciously projecting this onto the world when they report. But it does seem that, a lot of the time, if a news story does have some of these literary devices, where you have like a dramatic reversal of events and, then there's a happy ending or something, you're not reading the news, you're reading a story. But unfortunately, those kinds of stories sell so much better. They get a lot more attention. And so
they're easier to read as well. Even look at what great nonfiction. We're both big fans of Morgan Housel as a good example.
Yeah.
Right? Morgan Housel, nonfiction writer. Read one of his books. It's a storybook. It's a storybook masquerading as a finance book. And the philosophical underpinnings of this might very well inform your investing strategy or how you think about wealth or how you think about stuff that never changes. But when you read it, it's just a sequence of stories from history or stories from politics or from space or from sport or from whatever. It's story because it's so much easier for us to retain that kind of information.
Yeah. It's one of the kinds of paradoxes, which is that you can't really, you won't get read if you just tell the truth. Like, you have to dress it up in a story. And so you have to the only way you're going to actually be able to tell this truth is by making it a little bit fake, and so, I mean,
you got to ham it up a little bit.
Yeah. And I'll confess, I have to do this when I publish Substack articles. I try to be as honest as I can. I don't deliberately lie, but I know that, for instance, with the titles that I use, I do slightly use sensational titles because I know that if I don't, I'm not going to get as many readers. And so it's sort of an unfortunate necessity, but I think it's possible to tell the truth in story form. I do think it's possible. It's hard, but it's possible. And I think the best way to do it is to draw attention to the fact that you're telling a story. I think that's as long as you do that, then you can negate the fictional aspects of it, sort of thing. So it's like a kind of it's like a beautiful packaging that you tell them to rip off, and then they can actually get to the actual meat of what you're trying to say.
This episode is brought to you by Element. Stop having coffee first thing in the morning. Your adenosine system that caffeine acts on isn't even active for the first 90 minutes of the day, but your adrenal system is, and salt acts on your adrenal system. Element contains a science-backed electrolyte ratio of sodium, potassium, and magnesium with no sugar, no gluten, no coloring, no artificial ingredients, or any other BS. It plays a critical role in reducing muscle cramps and fatigue while optimizing brain health, regulating appetite, and curbing cravings. The orange flavor in a cold glass of water is literally the best way to start your morning. I've done it every single day for over 3 years now, way before they were a partner on the show, and I love it. Best of all, there is a no BS, no questions asked refund policy, so you can buy absolutely risk-free, and if you do not like it for any reason, they will give you your money back, and you don't even need to return the box. Right now, you can get a free sample pack of all 8 flavors with your first box by going to the link in the description below or heading to drinklmnt.com/modernwisdom. That's drinklmnt.com/modern wisdom. Thank you very much for tuning in. If you enjoyed that clip, you will love the full-length podcast in all its glory, which is available right here. Go on. Press it.